The Birth of Tragedy, read by Kairos, of the Threefold Manifold, July 23rd, 2025. Part 3. Chapter 2. Thus far, we have considered the Apollonian and his antithesis, the Dionysian, as artistic powers which burst forth from nature herself, without the mediation of the human artist, and in which her art impulses are satisfied in the most immediate and direct way. First, as the pictorial world of dreams, the perfection of which has no connection whatever with the intellectual height or artistic culture of the unit man. And again, as drunken reality, which likewise does not heed the unit man, but even seeks to destroy the individual and redeem him by a mystic feeling of oneness. Anent these immediate art states of nature, every artist is either an Apollonian, an artist in dreams, or a Dionysian, an artist in ecstasies, or finally, as for instance in Greek tragedy, an artist in both dreams and ecstasies, so we may perhaps picture him as in his Dionysian drunkenness and mystical self-abnegation, lonesome and apart from the reveling choruses. He sinks down and down now, through Apollonian dream inspiration, his own state, i.e., his oneness with the primal source of the universe, reveals itself to him in a symbolical dream picture. After these general premisings and contrastings, let us now approach the Greeks in order to learn in what degree and to what height these art impulses of nature were developed in them, whereby we shall be enabled to understand and appreciate more deeply the relation of the Greek artist to his archetypes, or, according to the Aristotelian expression, the imitation of nature. In spite of all the dream literature and the numerous dream anecdotes of the Greeks, we can speak only conjecturally, though with a fair degree of certainty, of their dreams. Considering the incredibly precise and unerring plastic power of their eyes, as also their manifest and sincere delight in colors, we can hardly refrain, to the shame of everyone born later, from assuming for their very dreams a logical causality of lines and contours, colors and groups, a sequence of scenes resembling their best reliefs, the perfection of which would certainly justify us, if a comparison were possible, in designating the dreaming Greeks as Homers, and Homer as a dreaming Greek, in a deeper sense than when modern man, in respect to his dreams, ventures to compare himself with Shakespeare. On the other hand, we should not have to speak conjecturally if asked to disclose the immense gap which separated the Dionysian Greek from the Dionysian barbarian. From all quarters of the ancient world, to say nothing of the modern, from Rome as far as Babylon, we can prove the existence of Dionysian festivals, the type of which bears, at best, the same relation to the Greek festivals as the bearded satyr, who borrowed his name and attributes from the goat, does to Dionysus himself. In nearly every instance, the center of these festivals lay in extravagant sexual licentiousness, the waves of which overwhelmed all family life and its venerable traditions. The very wildest beasts of nature were let loose here, including that detestable mixture of lust and cruelty, which has always seemed to me the genuine witch's draught. For some time, however, it would seem that the Greeks were perfectly secure and guarded against the feverish agitations of these festivals, the knowledge of which entered Greece by all the channels of land and sea, by the figure of Apollo himself rising here in full pride, who could not have held out the Gorgon's head to a more dangerous power than this grotesquely uncouth Dionysian. It is in Doric art that this majestically rejecting attitude of Apollo perpetuated itself. This opposition became more precarious and even impossible when, from out of the deepest root of the Hellenic nature, similar impulses finally broke forth and made their way for themselves. The Delphic god, by a seasonably effected reconciliation, was now contented with taking the destructive arms from the hand of his powerful antagonist. This reconciliation marks the most important moment in the history of the Greek cult. Wherever we turn our eyes, we may observe the revolutions resulting from this event. It was the reconciliation of two antagonists, with the sharp demarcation of the boundary lines to be thenceforth observed by each, and the periodical transmission of testimonials. In reality, the chasm was not bridged over. But if we observe how, under the pressure of this conclusion of peace, the Dionysian power manifested itself, we shall now recognize in the Dionysian orgies of the Greeks, as compared with the Babylonian Sakia, and their retrogression of man to the tiger and the ape, the significance of festivals, of world redemption and days of transfiguration. Not till then does the rupture of the principium individuationis become an artistic phenomenon. That horrible witch's draught of sensuality and cruelty was here powerless. Only the curious blending and duality in the emotions of the Dionysian revelers reminds one of it, just as medicines remind one of deadly poisons. That phenomenon, to wit, that pain begets joy, that jubilation rings painful sounds out of the breast. From the highest joy sounds the cry of horror or the yearning wail over an irretrievable loss. In these Greek festivals, a sentimental trait, as it were, breaks forth from nature, as if she must sigh over her dismemberment into individuals. The song and pantomime of such duly minded revelers was something new and unheard of in the Homeric Grecian world, and the Dionysian music in particular excited awe and horror. If music, as it would seem, was previously known as an Apollonian art, it was, strictly speaking, only the wave beat of rhythm, the formative power of which was developed to the representation of Apollonian conditions. The music of Apollo was Doric architectonics in tones, but in merely suggested tones, as those of the Cithara. The very element which forms the essence of Dionysian music, and hence of music in general, is carefully excluded as un-Apollonian. Namely, the thrilling power of the tone, the uniform stream of the melos, and the thoroughly incomparable world of harmony. In the Dionysian dithyramb, man is incited to the highest exaltation of all his symbolic faculties. Something never before experienced struggles for utterance, the annihilation of the veil of Maya, oneness as genius of the race, I of nature. The essence of nature is now to be expressed symbolically. A new world of symbols is required. For once the entire symbolism of the body, not only the symbolism of the lips, face, and speech, but the whole pantomime of dancing which sets all the members into rhythmical motion. Thereupon, the other symbolic powers, those of music, in rhythms, dynamics, and harmony, suddenly become impetuous. To comprehend this collective discharge of all the symbolic powers, a man must have already attained that height of self-abnegation which wills to express itself symbolically through these powers. The dithyrambic votary of Dionysus is therefore understood only by those like himself. With what astonishment must the Apollonian Greek have beheld him! With an astonishment which was all the greater the more it was mingled with the shuddering suspicion that all this was in reality not so very foreign to him, yea, that, like unto a veil, his Apollonian consciousness only hid this Dionysian world from his view. Chapter 3. In order to comprehend this, we must take down the artistic structure of the Apollonian culture, as it were, stone by stone, till we behold the foundation on which it rests. Here we observe first all the glorious Olympian figures of the gods standing on the gables of this structure, whose deeds, represented in far shining reliefs, adorn its friezes. Though Apollo stands among them as an individual deity, side by side with others, and without claim of priority to rank, we must not suffer this fact to mislead us. The same impulse which embodies itself in Apollo has in general given birth to this whole Olympian world, and in this sense we may regard Apollo as the father thereof. What was the enormous need from which proceeded such an illustrious group of Olympian beings? Beings. Whosoever, with another religion in his heart, approaches these Olympians and seeks among them for moral elevation, even for sanctity, for incorporeal spiritualization, for sympathetic looks of love, will soon be obliged to turn his back on them, discouraged and disappointed. Here nothing suggests asceticism, spirituality, or duty. Here only an exuberant, even triumphant life speaks to us, in which everything existing is deified, whether good or bad. And so the spectator will, perhaps, stand quite bewildered before this fantastic exuberance of life, and ask himself what magic potion these madly merry men could have used for enjoying life, so that, wherever they turn their eyes, Helena, the ideal image of their own existence, floating in sweet sensuality, smiled upon them. But to this spectator, already turning backwards, we must call out, "Depart not hence, but hear rather what Greek folk wisdom says of this same life, which with such inexplicable cheerfulness spreads out before thee." There is an ancient story that King Midas hunted in the forest a long time for the wise Silenus, the companion of Dionysus, without capturing him. When at last he fell into his hands, the king asked what was best of all and most desirable for man. Fixed and immovable, the demon remained silent, till, at last, forced by the king, he broke out with shrill laughter into these words: "O wretched race of a day, children of chance and misery, why do ye compel me to say to you what it were most expedient for you not to hear? What is best of all is forever beyond your reach. Not to be born, not to be nothing. The second best for you, however, is soon to die." How is the Olympian world of deities related to this folk wisdom? Even as the rapturous vision of the tortured martyr to his sufferings. Now the Olympian magic mountain opens, as it were, to our view, and shows us its roots. The Greek knew and felt the terrors and horrors of existence. To be able to live at all, he had to interpose the shining dream birth of the Olympian world between himself and them. The excessive distrust of the titanic powers of nature, the Moira, throning inexorably over all knowledge, the vulture of the great philanthropist Prometheus, the terrible fate of the wise Oedipus, the family curse of Atridae, which drove Orestes to matricide. In short, that entire philosophy of the sylvan god, with its mythical exemplars, which wrought the ruin of the melancholy Etruscans, was again and again surmounted anew by the Greeks through the artistic middle world of the Olympians, or at least veiled and withdrawn from sight. To be able to live, the Greeks had, from direst necessity, to create these gods, which process we may perhaps picture to ourselves in this manner: that, out of the original Titan thearchy of terror, The Olympian thearchy of joy was evolved by slow transitions through the Apollonian impulse to beauty, even as roses break forth from thorny bushes. How else could this so sensitive people, so vehement in its desires, so singularly qualified for sufferings, have endured existence, if it had not been exhibited to them in their gods, surrounded with a higher glory? The same impulse which calls art into being, as the complement and consummation of existence seducing to a continuation of life, caused also the Olympian world to arise, in which the Hellenic will held up before itself a transfiguring mirror. Thus do the gods justify the life of man, in that they themselves live it, the only satisfactory theodicy. Existence under the bright sunshine of such gods is regarded as that which is desirable in itself, and the real grief of the Homeric min has reference to parting from it, especially to early parting, so that we might now say of them, with a reversion of the Silenian wisdom, that to die early is worst of all for them. The second worst is, some day, to die at all. If once the lamentation is heard, it will ring out again, of the short-lived Achilles, of the leaf-like change and vicissitude of the human race, of the decay of the heroic age. It is not unworthy of the greatest hero to long for a continuation of life, aye, even as a day-laborer. So vehemently does the will, at the Apollonian stage of development, long for this existence. So completely at once does the Homeric man feel himself with it, that the very lamentation becomes its song of praise. Here we must observe that this harmony, which is so eagerly contemplated by modern man, is in fact the oneness of man with nature, to express which Schiller introduced the technical term naive, is by no means such a simple, naturally resulting and, as it were, inevitable condition, which must be found at the gate of every culture leading to a paradise of man. This could be believed only by an age which sought to picture itself, Rousseau's Émilie, also as an artist, and imagined it had found in Homer such an artist Émilie, reared at nature's bosom. Wherever we meet the naive in art, it behoves us to recognize the highest effect of the Apollonian culture, which, in the first place, has always to overthrow some titanic empire and slay monsters, and which, through powerful, dazzling representations and pleasurable illusions, must have triumphed over a terrible depth of world contemplation and a most keen susceptibility to suffering. But how seldom is the naive, that complete absorption in the beauty of appearance, attained! And hence how inexpressibly sublime is Homer, who, as unit being, bears the same relation to this Apollonian folk culture as the unit dream artist does to the dream faculty of the people and of nature in general. The Homeric naivete can be comprehended only as the complete triumph of the Apollonian illusion. It is the same kind of illusion as nature so frequently employs to compass her ends. The true goal is veiled by a phantasm. We stretch out our hands for the latter, while nature attains the former through our illusion. In the Greeks, the will desired to contemplate itself in the transfiguration of the genius and the world of art. In order to glorify themselves, its creatures had to feel themselves worthy of glory. They had to behold themselves again in a higher sphere, without this consummate world of contemplation acting as an imperative or reproach. Such is the sphere of beauty, in which, as in a mirror, they saw their images, the Olympians. With this mirroring of beauty, the Hellenic will combated its talent, correlative to the artistic, for suffering and for the wisdom of suffering. And, as a monument of its victory, Homer, the naive artist, stands before us. Chapter 4. Concerning the naive artist, the analogy of dreams will enlighten us to some extent. When we realize to ourselves the dreamer, as, in the midst of the illusion of the dream world, and without disturbing it, he calls out to himself, "It is a dream, I will dream on." When we must thence infer a deeper inner joy in dream contemplation. When, on the other hand, to be at all able to dream with this inner joy in contemplation, we must have completely forgotten the day in its terrible obtrusiveness. We may, under the direction of the dream-reading Apollo, interpret all these phenomena to ourselves somewhat as follows. Though it is certain that of the two halves of life, the waking and the dreaming, the former appeals to us by far the more preferred, important, excellent, and worthy of being lived, indeed, as that which alone is lived. Yet, with reference to that mysterious ground of our being of which we are the phenomenon, I should, paradoxically as it may seem, be inclined to maintain the very opposite estimate of the value of dream life. For the more clearly I perceive in nature those all-powerful art impulses, and in them a fervent longing for appearance, for redemption through appearance, the more I feel myself driven to the metaphysical assumption that the verily existent and primordial unity, as the eternally suffering and self-contradictory, requires the rapturous vision, the joyful appearance for its continuous salvation, which appearance we, who are completely wrapped in it and composed of it, must regard as the verily non-existent, i.e., as a perpetual unfolding in time, space, and causality. In other words, as empiric reality. If we therefore waive the consideration of our own reality for the present, if we conceive our empiric existence and that of the world generally as a representation of the primordial unity generated every moment, we shall then have to regard the dream as an appearance of appearance. Hence, as a still higher gratification of the primordial desire for appearance. It is for this same reason that the innermost heart of nature experiences that indescribable joy in the naive artist and in the naive work of art, which is likewise only an appearance of appearance. In a symbolic painting, Raphael, himself one of these immortal naive ones, has represented to us this depotentiating of appearance to appearance, the primordial process of the naive artist, and at the same time of Apollonian culture. In his Transfiguration, the lower half, with the possessed body, the despairing bearers, the helpless, terrified disciples, shows to us the reflection of eternal primordial pain, the sole basis of the world. The appearance here is the counter-appearance of eternal contradiction, the father of things. Out of this appearance then arises, like an ambrosial vapor, a vision-like new world of appearances, of which those wrapped in the first appearance see nothing. A radiant, floating in purest bliss, and painless contemplation beaming from wide open eyes. Here is presented to our view, in the highest symbolism of art, that Apollonian world of beauty and its substratum, the terrible wisdom of Silenus. And we comprehend by intuition their necessary interdependence. Apollo, however, again appears to us as the apotheosis of the principium individuationis, in which alone the perpetually attained end of the primordial unity, its redemption through appearance, is consummated. He shows us with sublime attitudes how the entire world of torment is necessary, that thereby the individual may be impelled to realize the redeeming vision, and then, sunk in contemplation thereof, quietly sit in his fluctuating bark in the midst of the sea. This apotheosis of individuation, if it be at all conceived as imperative in laying down precepts, knows but one law, the individual, i.e., the observance of the boundaries of the individual, measure in the Hellenic sense. Apollo, as ethical deity, demands due proportion of his disciples, and, that this may be observed, he demands self-knowledge, and thus, parallel to the aesthetic necessity for beauty, there run the demands, know thyself, and not too much, while presumption and undueness are regarded as the truly hostile demons of the non-Apollonian sphere, hence, as characteristics of the pre-Apollonian age, that of the Titans, and of the extra-Apollonian world, that of the barbarians. Because of his Titan-like love for man, Prometheus had to be torn to pieces by vultures. Because of his excessive wisdom, which solved the riddle of the Sphinx, Oedipus had to be plunged into a bewildering vortex of monstrous crimes. Thus did the Delphic god interpret the Grecian past. So also the effects wrought by the Dionysian appeared titanic and barbaric to the Apollonian Greek, while at the same time he could not conceal from himself that he too was inwardly related to these overthrown Titans and heroes. Indeed, he had to recognize still more than this, his entire existence, with all its beauty and moderation, rested on a hidden substratum of suffering and of knowledge, which was again disclosed to him by the Dionysian. And lo, Apollo could not live without Dionysus. The Titanic and the barbaric were in the end not less necessary than the Apollonian. And now, let us imagine to ourselves how the ecstatic tone of the Dionysian festival sounded in ever more luring and bewitching strains into this artificially confined world built on appearance and moderation. How, in these strains, all the undueness of nature in joy, sorrow, and knowledge, even to the transpiercing shriek, became audible. Let us ask ourselves what meaning could be attached to the psalmodizing artist of Apollo with the phantom harp sound, as compared with this demonic folk song. The muses of the arts of appearance paled before an art which, in its intoxication, spoke the truth. The wisdom of Silenus cried, "Woe! Woe!" against the cheerful Olympians. The individual, with all his boundaries and due proportions, went under in the self-oblivion of the Dionysian states, and forgot the Apollonian precepts. The undueness revealed itself as truth. The contradiction, the bliss born of pain, declared itself but of the heart of nature. And thus, wherever the Dionysian prevailed, the Apollonian was routed and annihilated. But it is quite as certain that, where the first assault was successfully withstood, the authority and majesty of the Delphic god exhibited itself as more rigid and menacing than ever. For I can only explain to myself the Doric state and Doric art as a permanent war camp of the Apollonian. Only by incessant opposition to the titanic barbaric nature of the Dionysian was it possible for an art to so defiantly prim, so encompassed with bulwarks, a training so warlike and rigorous, a constitution so cruel and relentless, to last for any length of time. Up to this point, we have enlarged upon the observation made at the beginning of this essay, how the Dionysian and the Apollonian in ever new births, succeeding and mutually augmenting one another, controlled the Hellenic genius. How, from out the age of bronze, with its titan struggles and rigorous folk philosophy, the Homeric world develops under the fostering sway of the Apollonian impulse to beauty. How this naive splendor is again overwhelmed by the inbursting flood of the Dionysian, and how against this new power the Apollonian rises to the austere majesty of Doric art and the Doric view of things. If then, in this way, in the strife of these two hostile principles, the older Hellenic history falls into four great periods of art, we are now driven to inquire after the ulterior purpose of these unfoldings and processes, unless, perchance, we should regard the last attained period, the period of Doric art, as the end and aim of these artistic impulses, and here the sublime and highly celebrated artwork of Attic tragedy and dramatic dithyramb presents itself to our view as the common goal of both these impulses, whose mysterious union, after many and long precursory struggles, found its glorious consummation in such a child, which is at once Antigone and Cassandra. I thank you all for joining us today. If you found it worthwhile, I hope that you consider giving it a like, share, subscribe, making your comments, contributing to the community here on the videos, wherever it may be, or on Discord in our attempt at founding something that cares for these kinds of things, that really strives to embrace the literature, the art, the media as something greater than a simple pastime. If you perhaps found it worthy, you can seek us out on X, Instagram, Bitchute, Spotify, or the aforesaid Threefold Edifactory linked on the video on Discord. If you thought it might be worth a little bit more support, something worth pitching a little bit of monies to, we have our one-time donation that you can set up through the link provided to Streamelements, or if you want something in return for a slightly more recurring venture, and importantly, access to the workshop files and items such as the up-and-coming game document that we will be reviewing in one of the following streams. Then we have Patreon.com starting at $5 a month. Starting at the proponent tier, you can get your name listed at the end of every long-form piece of content like this one rolling as we close out, or perhaps even in the introduction, depending on what you like. And, importantly, you can participate in polls for the channel direction. Maybe you want to see something change. Maybe you want to see a game or a piece of literature engaged in, reviewed, spoken about. Questions you might want to ask more directly. All available to you at the price of a mere $5. And you can leave at any time. But, without further ado, I hope that you all never miss your opportunities.